Why should they vote for you? What distinguishes you as a candidate?
Well, ultimately, I mean, the voters should vote for, whoever they feel is better. I have a lot of experience. I've been practicing law for about almost 20 years. I've done many trials, many appeals. I've handled appeals to the Seventh Circuit. We just recently filed a appeal of a property rights case to the United States Supreme Court. I'm a lifelong resident of Wisconsin, and my roots are here. I'm not sure. I'm probably my primary opponent also. So, but I think I understand and in our legal practice, certainly over the years, we've represented not just the haves, but we've represented an awful lot of middle class people, and also people who maybe don't have the same economic abundance as others. And I believe that experience has allowed me to very, very intimately understand the difficulties of people who aren't millionaires or billionaires in interfacing with the legal system and in interfacing with the government, and how people are often victimized by government, not necessarily through the government wishing to victimize them, but just through the workings of the vast and sometimes overzealous bureaucracy. So I would certainly be somebody who, I also have a master's degree in cultural anthropology, so I do think I have the training to understand different cultural viewpoints and how people interact with each other and what they expect and what their hopes and dreams are. And I think a very strong foundation in the United States Constitution. So, I would be someone who certainly would be able to, on day one in Congress, understand very, very well what it is that a piece of legislation means. Obviously, you don't just read it and understand, but you have to interact with it, and how it would likely be litigated, what the ultimate outcomes of it would be. And then, I understand very, very well the challenges that working people face and are facing right now. Many people are having difficulty buying groceries. Many people are struggling to make house payments, and many people are unable to afford to buy a first home and are stuck in a cycle of renting, even though they would like to be homeowners. Farmers in many ways are struggling right now. Some of them certainly are doing very well, but others not so much. And then I also am very, 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 very deeply attuned to the challenges that people of faith are facing right now, and people in the Jewish community, with the tremendous rise of anti-Semitism in this country, much of it coming from the Democrat Party, and either coming directly from members of the Democrat Party, coming from Democrat-oriented institutions, and at best very tepidly condemned by the majority of Democrat political leaders. So that is something that I would be very, very strongly acting to eradicate. There's no place in this country for anti-Semitism. And there's also a big need for political leaders who care about just ordinary people in the middle, people of lesser economic means, and who want to make sure that the promises of this country and the constitutional guarantees are upheld for them as well, not just for the rich.
You mentioned combating anti-Semitism. If you were elected, what would that look like from you? What could Congress do? What could you do as an individual elected representative?
Well, for one thing, it's a platform to call it out and say, this is happening, this is wrong, and this can't continue. The demonization of Israel that goes on, the facade of anti-Zionism or whatever people want to call it, which is really just virulent anti-Semitism that's become rampant on our college campuses, we have to take immediate action against that. The most simple and immediate thing to do would be to say that there are going to be financial penalties for institutions of higher learning that allow things like this to happen on their campuses. We need to take a very, very hard look at making sure that there are enough professors and staff hired who have a more balanced viewpoint instead of just having a radically anti-Semitic viewpoint. And so, I'm sure you're aware of what happened at places like Columbia this year and also at UW-Madison. I was down at UW-Madison when they were having a pro-Hamas, which is a designated terrorist organization, rally in Library Mall, and I was shocked. And I spoke to numerous Jewish students who feel unsafe on campus. That absolutely cannot be allowed to continue. Our campaign published 2 full-page ads in the Wisconsin State Journal condemning anti-Semitism, and I would continue and amplify those efforts in Congress and on the campaign trail. And also, I would very, very, well, anyway, that was your question, so maybe you have another question. But I mean, ultimately, Congress can legislate, and Congress controls to some degree the budget, and so those are the tools that are available to act as a constituent and as a representative in Congress to represent the constituents of this district.
So when it comes to foreign policy, what should the role of the United States be? In particular, what, if any, support should the United States offer to countries such as Israel and Ukraine?
Well, first of all, to understand the situation that's occurring in Israel right now, we have to understand that often, there's a certain narrative that characterizes this, that what's going on in the Middle East is a conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians. That's a false narrative. That's an utterly false and maliciously anti-Semitic narrative. What is going on in the Middle East right now is part of the struggle between Iran, which is allied with China and to a certain degree Russia, against the United States of America and our allies, to the extent that we have them, are on the other side of that balance of power. And so we have to unequivocally 100% support Israel. We have to make sure that we tell the true story of what's going on over there, which is that Hamas, do you know what the word proxy means? Mm-hmm. Okay. Hamas is a proxy of Iran. Hamas does not care about the people who live in Gaza. Hamas does not care about the Palestinians. Hamas cares about asserting Iran's strategic initiatives and using Palestinian lives as pawns in that process. So when Hamas hides its terrorist fighters in occupied areas, in areas where, and I don't mean occupied by Israel, I mean occupied by civilians, that the civilians are in the building, for example, in a hospital or in an apartment, and Hamas hides its fighters there, forcing a situation where civilian casualties occur with the explicit goal, Hamas's explicit goal is forcing civilian casualties so that they can parade dead Palestinian bodies on television to try to gain foreign support. That's a sickening thing to do. If the United States military ever did something like that, it would be beyond anything that any American would ever allow. We do not hide our military amongst our own civilians as a way of creating newsreels. That's disgusting. And the media should be doing a lot better job calling it out. Congress should be doing a lot better job calling it out. And the whole world should be doing a lot better job calling it out instead of just letting this false narrative occur. So I would do everything within my power to correct that narrative. I believe the United States of America needs to unequivocally 100% support Israel, period. And we have to ultimately, win not militarily, because militarily is actually a very bad way of winning things. We have to win hearts and minds and let people know what's right. Just as an example, very few people, I don't know, probably you know, but very few people are aware of the vicious crackdown on women's rights that's occurring in Iran right now. Were you aware of that?
Right, of course.
Right, and where is that in the media? Where's the outrage over people like Masa Amini and all these young women who just want to have the right to dress the way they want and run their lives the way they want, and they're being brutally suppressed by a dictatorial Iranian regime? And instead, we just constantly hear a drumbeat of hatred against Israel. But where's the outrage against Iran? And then when it comes to Ukraine, that is a very, very sad situation. And I mean, on that score, where is the public discourse about how to end that conflict so that people stop dying? You see what I mean? All these people who are over in the trenches there, be they Russian or Ukrainian, they have families, they had lives, and they're having their lives and their homes and everything destroyed in a meat grinder of trench warfare, the likes of which we probably haven't seen since possibly even World War I, but maybe World War II. Where is the compelling global discourse on how do we end this? What do we do? What do we do to make peace? What do we do so the killing stops? What do we do so the dying stops? And I don't know what your politics are. I'm a supporter of President Donald J. Trump, and I firmly believe that if he were the president, that would not have happened. All those people would be alive. That war wouldn't have happened.
The invasion wouldn't have happened?
The invasion would not have
from
happened,
Russia?
period. It would not have happened. And that invasion from Russia, in my opinion, is the direct result of weak leadership in this country, namely Joe Biden, a weak, ineffective president. And because of him and because of his weak leadership, a lot of people have lost their lives. A lot of families have lost their homes, or maybe a mother or a father or a child is dead. It's a tragedy of epic proportions. And instead of the media doing its job to raise the public awareness of the tragedy that's going on, it's become a partisan debate over should we spend more money on bombs or should we not spend more money on bombs. Give me a break. We need to be working together across the aisle to end the killing and bring peace. So
should Congress approve aid packages for Ukraine? Is that something you would support if you were elected?
Well, we can't just abandon them. You know, at this juncture, the whole thing is underway, and we certainly can't just throw our hands up in the air and abandon the situation and allow Russia to claim total victory. So due to Joe Biden's weak and pathetic leadership, we're stuck in a very bad situation. But whatever aid packages we whatever aid packages we approve, we have to make sure that discussions about how to end the conflict are occurring in conjunction with them, and that there's a strong institutional will to end the conflict. You see what I mean? Because it's one thing to just say, oh, here's another check. Would you like some bombs? And it's another thing to say, look, we have to support you. We're going to help you defend yourself. But we are committed to peace and to stopping the killing. And we are going to get very involved to make sure that these hostilities are brought to an end. It's pathetic.
So switching gears, when it comes to abortion, do you think the Dobbs decision from the U.S. Supreme Court was rightly decided or not?
Well, you know, I am an attorney, so there's a saying that the Supreme Court isn't right, or isn't final because it's always right. It's right because it's final, and so certainly, you know, there's an argument to be made that states should be deciding it. For me, I believe that life begins at conception. That's what I believe. I also don't think that the government should be locking up women who have abortions and using the the mechanism of criminal law to pursue people, I think that we're at a place where really, if you want to know really what I believe, which I suppose is why you're calling, I think we should all be working together to make sure that abortion doesn't occur, because people have the resources they need to raise children. I mean, how crazy is it that we have apparently enormous billions of dollars to spend on bombs to fuel a war in Ukraine, and we don't have money to make sure that a young woman who maybe is pregnant in a situation where she would perhaps like to have a child but feels she can't afford it is not given the help she needs to do that. I find that sickening. And so I do believe that a lot of abortions occur due to just lack of people working together to make sure that people have birth control, and to make sure that people are knowledgeable about how to use birth control, and to make sure that in situations where people have pregnancies that are, that will say, that they are questioning what to do, that they're given the resources and help that they need to make a decision that supports life. And I realize that's an unpopular opinion in some circles, but that's my opinion. So when Dobbs says send it back to the states, I mean, that's what the Supreme Court decided, So there we are.
I mean, are you satisfied with the current status where it's a state-by-state basis? I mean, would you support abortion restrictions passed by Congress? I know you said you don't support prosecuting the women who get abortions, but, restrictions that would affect providers of abortion, for example. Should Congress pass nationwide abortion restrictions? And if so, what would those look like?
Well, it really, I guess I don't think that the way to deal with that sort of an issue is through nationwide restrictions by the federal government. I mean, there was a situation before Roe versus Wade where women were a lot of times getting abortions, but getting abortions in very unsafe situations. And that's a travesty, that can't be allowed to occur. So I don't think that the way to do it is restricting things, if you follow what I'm saying. I guess if there was any particular piece of legislation that on that topic, I would read it very carefully, and then I would, think about it and talk to people about it, with the idea being that I believe that abortion is something very, very bad. And if there's a way to compassionately and collaboratively reduce it or end it, I think that's a very good idea. However, I'm very familiar with the fact that a lot of times laws are passed that have very unfair and very sometimes unexpected consequences, or sometimes consequences that if someone who had read the legislation, who actually had, for example, done the amount of litigation that I've done, read it and said, well, even though it says this, it's going to have this result, that, people are going to be women are going to be sitting in prison someplace and others not. And I mean, we've got to stop prosecuting people in this country for things that are not really, that it's useless or whatever. I don't think locking people up is typically the way to solve things, quite frankly. Now, in some cases, if people are dangerous and hurting other people, yes, we definitely have to lock them up and keep them away. Or if they're doing things that are really hurting people. But I think there's an overuse of the criminal justice system in this country. And in fact, it's even morphed into, to some degree, a situation where politically people are using the criminal justice system to go after one another. And I think we'll see a time when people really regret that we ever went that way, because in the United States of America, the people should be deciding who the elected leaders are at the ballot box, not getting involved in all this litigation. I don't think litigation works very well usually, quite frankly, and I've been doing it for 20 years.
So gotcha. So just to verify, to make sure I'm summarizing, accurately, I mean, at this point, if there were a bill before you related to abortion, let's say restricting it up to a certain point of pregnancy, you'd have to look at the individual bill, but you're satisfied with leaving abortion restrictions up to the states at the moment?
Well, I'm running for federal office, okay? And the law as it sits right now has said that that is not a federal issue, that's a state's issue. And I've told you my own personal beliefs on it, but probably one of my absolute strongest beliefs is that the federal government should largely be uninvolved in matters of state concern. Now, where you draw that line with abortion, I guess, I guess, I realize this may not actually be kind of like the answer you want, but I think my feelings, which is that I would like to see a world in which abortion doesn't occur. But I do not want to see anybody locked up or get hurt due to clumsy attempts to achieve that goal legalistically. Do you see what I'm saying?
So when it comes to preventing abortion, what should Congress do? Is it a matter of more federal money for contraceptives? Is it expanding Medicaid? Is it mandating paid family leave? What do you think some of the solutions should be?
Well, for one thing, would be to make sure that, if Congress is going to do anything, a very easy thing to do, which I have no idea why it hasn't been done, is to make sure, for example, that women who are pregnant and who are facing certain economic realities have free diapers. That's just such an obvious thing. You see what I mean? There's such a thing as diaper poverty. Women, sometimes men maybe, I don't know, who have children, who want to raise those children, who are not making a lot of money, who can't afford diapers. So that's something I would advocate for immediately. Let's make sure they have diapers. Let's make sure that families that have children, or single parents, whatever, that have children that are of lesser economic means are guaranteed to have access to nutritious food. Is that unreasonable? So, we have a system, again, not to just sound like a broken record here, but everybody seems gung-ho about approving massive packages for weapons to different places, but yet we don't want to take common sense, reasonable steps to make sure that parents who might like to have a child instead of going the path of abortion are economically able to do it without suffering. And so I think that's inexcusable.
Gotcha. So another topic, but when it comes to immigration, what do you think about immigration policy as it currently stands in the United States? What would you want to see change? What sort of immigration policies would you support?
The current immigration policy is one of the biggest travesties that I've ever seen in my entire life, where everybody is apparently aware that all sorts of people are coming here illegally. Nobody seems to be taking even remotely common sense efforts to come up with some legislation to provide an orderly way for people who want to come here and work to come and have a work permit or some kind of a status where they can come and say, I'd like to work in the United States for a while. Obviously, the labor is needed. On the other hand, you hear strange stories about people coming here and sometimes surprisingly large amounts of taxpayer money being expended on them. And then you hear about horrible situations where people become indebted to criminal cartels in order to cross the border. That's the result of failed policy and failed legislative decisions. So in other words, we've done such a poor job with our legislative and immigration system, that criminal enterprises are profiting off of lending people exorbitant amounts of money to traffic them across the border in unsafe situations. And then those people a lot of times are in a sort of a debt peonage. And many times they're exploited for their labor. Many times they're exploited as unwilling sex workers, if you can believe that is happening in this day and age, but it is. So it's a complete and utter failure. It needs and I did some immigration law, and it doesn't work well at all. It's opaque, it's difficult to navigate, and it doesn't address the actual realities of what's going on, which is that there are a lot of people who are coming here because they're desperate for a better life. We apparently need labor. We need it. And nevertheless, I suppose just because it's politically touchy or something like that, nobody wants to take the forefront and say, here's what we need to do. We need to set up a system so that people can come in an orderly way, and we know who they are, and we know what they're doing here, and we do some sort of a background check to make sure that we don't have people with we even we could have war criminals coming here for all we know, because they're just being moved across the border by, as I said before, by criminal enterprises. So I would champion a total overhaul of the immigration system. I would put an enormous amount of effort into border security so that people who want to come here know that there's a right way to do it, and that they likely will be able to come and work if they want to do that, and contribute and be part of it if that's what they honestly intend to do, but that it will not work to sneak across the border or come illegally. And therefore that would also take away a profit center from the cartels. We have to say, it's almost like during Prohibition. The prohibition on alcohol had the not so unforeseeable effect of putting enormous amounts of money in the hands of criminals. Fair? And so, right. And right now, the broken, opaque, useless immigration policy and legislation has the fairly foreseeable effect of creating a massive profit center for dangerous criminal organizations, and landing many people in situations where they're being trafficked for their labor or for their unwilling sexually trafficked. I mean, it has to stop. I would take a forefront in stopping that. I can't stand it.
So in 2020, did Joe Biden win the election?
Well, he became the president, right? I thought it was I thought it was a farce. I thought the whole thing was a farce, quite frankly. And I think that the biggest culprit in the whole story was quite, not you maybe. I don't know if you were involved or not. But I think the media did an absolutely horrendous job and put their thumb on the scale of the election in an unforgivable way.
So when you say the whole thing was a farce, what do you mean by that? What specifically?
I mean, the way that the media covered the presidency of Donald Trump since day one was completely, in my opinion, one-sided. The way that the media covered the presidency of Joe Biden since the beginning of his election was completely one-sided in the other direction. And I go around the state and talk to people, and probably, well, the district, but for work I also go around the state. The number of people who have close to zero trust in the media is astounding, and that's a shame. It's a real shame. So when the media doesn't report the facts, when the media spins things, and I suppose to some extent it's on both sides, but it's a shame, because the media should be telling the facts and then letting people make up their minds, and there's not a lot of that going on right now.
Gotcha. I guess, saying that the two presidencies were uncovered differently or unfairly, that's one thing. But, do you think that Joe Biden rightfully won more electoral votes is what I'm asking? Because, former President Trump has denied losing. Is that something you agree with? That's what I'm getting at.
Well, it's when former President Trump won the election in 2016, then I believe it was then Green Party candidate Jill Stein undertook a recount, and then there was an ongoing project, I guess you might call it, of denying that President Trump had fairly won the 2016 election, including stories that there had been some sort of Russian collusion, which eventually, I believe, at least in part, were shown to be due to the malfeasance of the Clinton campaign, which I believe was fined. I could be wrong about the exact dynamics of how the fine was levied, but I believe that story was utterly debunked, and that the Clinton campaign faced some sort of a fine. I know that, for example, at any rate, the reality of the situation is that Joe Biden was sworn in as the president. He got more electoral votes. And at some point in time, people have to understand that certain legislative and legal processes are in place, and that if you want to do something, it generally has to be done legally. I'm saying, as far as litigation, it has to be done before the election. So, for example, after the 2020 election, there was an enormous amount of litigation. Okay, and people are entitled to do that. It just typically doesn't work very well, and as can be seen, because now the whole presidency is done and we're at the next election. So do I agree with every single court case that was filed and this and that? I have no idea, because I haven't followed it. The reality is that, it happened the way it happened. And to say, oh, well, we shouldn't have had ballot drop boxes, or we shouldn't have had this, or we shouldn't have had that, or the media should have, covered things differently. It's sad when people can't just respect, okay, Donald Trump won in 2016, Biden won in 2020. How do we know? Because the litigation played out, and there it was, I don't know what to tell you other than that. There is an awful lot of, I hate to say this, but there's an awful lot of anger. I don't feel at all angry, but I've talked to many people who feel very angry, both about the 2016 election on the left, largely on the left, and about the 2020 election more on the Republican side. And if I can prevail on you to do one thing, it's to tell people that they need to calm down, and we need to reduce the level of polarization in this country. We need to learn to be more trustful of each other and our institutions. And we need to learn that when one party is in power, to try to give them a chance to implement their goals. And when another party is, give them some kind of a chance to do the same thing, and try to work across the aisle. If you remember, I don't know how old you are, and I guess it's none of my business, but previously we had a governor in the state, Tommy Thompson, and he was great about working across the aisle. And as a result of that, a lot of the legislation that he championed stood the test of time even after he was out of office. So I don't know what to tell you, Sarah. One way of looking at it is that if a lot of people feel that if it's unfair, there's something wrong, And then another way of looking at it is that maybe it's just, we've got a problem in this country. We've got to get to a point where we're working together more.
So when it comes to economic policy, how would you define yourself? How do you stand when it comes to fiscal issues? Where do you fall on the spectrum there?
Well, that's a pretty broad question. I'm definitely strongly supportive of people who are working people, and making sure that, I consider it to be good economic policy if it means that people or families are able to pay their bills, they're able to buy a home, they're able to participate in society, they're able to ensure that they and their children are educated. I don't think it's a working economic policy when the people who are at the top, millionaires and billionaires, are enjoying record profits and record growth in their net wealth, while other people are having a higher credit card debt every month because they can't afford the groceries. And where families or young families or people who wish to buy a home are unable to do it because they're priced out of the market, so then they're stuck renting. And I don't think that's a working economic policy, but I am very, very aware of the fact that we need to do something about the national debt in this country on a very urgent basis, because it will eventually become unpayable and swallow us up. And that's a real danger. We're, I think, now above 34 trillion. I guess if I'm a little bit off on that, don't jump all over it, but we're definitely above 30 trillion, and it's rising. And when you look at what happens, how will it eventually work? How will our grandkids or whatever live if we don't get a handle on it now? And it can be done. We need to work together as a team, and we need to find ways to deal with it, but it can't be ways that just push more and more people into poverty while others become richer and richer.
If you had to pick one issue to define your candidacy, what would that be?
I would say 100% it is that I think that as a country we need to learn how to work together better. We need to celebrate America and realize that America, is great in a way because it's constantly improving. It doesn't mean we're perfect, but I do very, very deeply believe that the United States of America is the greatest country yet to exist on this earth, and that it is our responsibility to work together to make sure that the framework that allowed that to occur is honored and is secured into the future. And that means protecting our constitutional rights. That means economic common sense in the way that I've described it, so that we do have a vibrant and growing middle class, which I think is the backbone of a free society. And it means all the other things that we've spoken about in this interview, because I do think you ask good questions. But at its core, I think we need to get away from a demonization of ourselves or of a portion of ourselves. And we need to get more back towards understanding that I may be a Republican, but if there's a family that votes Democrat, I want them to thrive. I want everybody to thrive. I want everybody to enjoy the freedoms and blessings of the United States of America. And I want America to be a beacon in the world that makes that possible in other places as well, realizing that there are complexities to that and that we can't necessarily interfere in other countries' affairs, but at the same time, in certain limited types of circumstances, it does become our obligation to do that. And then when we do that, we have to do it responsibly. And you see what I mean? We can't just, everything feels very chaotic, very polarized, and very unstable right now. And I believe we have to open our hearts to one another. We have to come back to being Americans, and we have to find solutions that make it possible to continue this great thing that we have, this wonderful country, this wonderful enterprise, and grow it and make it better for the future.
Are there areas where you think your views might overlap with views of many Democrats, and what might those be? Where are those issues where you think there's room to meet in the middle?
I think that one of the very sad things that's happened in the world today, and particularly in the United States, is that people are forgetting how much they agree on. I think that there would be an enormous overlap between my ideas and the things I'm passionate about and many of the people who would likely vote for Mr. Pocan, or Representative Pocan, Congressman Pocan, I should say. I think we would probably, if we would sit down and speak together for a while and spend some time together with those voters and with me, they would say, I really like most of what he believes in and I like most of what he says. And maybe there would be some things we disagree on too. But, even people who vote the same party often disagree vehemently on certain things. So that doesn't mean anything. I think there's a lot of overlap, and I think we need to start, instead of focusing on differences or wedge issues or divisiveness, we need to start looking towards issues that we agree on and building consensus and building strength together and building collaborative solutions.
Is there anything that I didn't ask that you would like to add?
Well, I'm sure we could talk all day, and mainly I've just been talking, but I think a lot about things, and I'm an avid reader, and I'm a student of, I have trained in anthropology, and I love people, and I spend a lot of time listening to people and learning about how they live and what they think and what they feel, and sometimes feeling their pain and sometimes feeling their joy at different things. So I think, you seem like a very thoughtful and articulate person, and I'm sure we could talk for a long time, but I've answered the questions you asked to the best I could. I hope it came across what I'm about.